In this presentation, I'll be walking you through how to complete Implementation Requirement Sheet or Sheet for PA Practice 390, which covers herbaceous riparian buffers. On the left here, you'll see a screen grab of the first page of IR Sheet 390. On the right, you will see the Excel version of the sheet in real time. Throughout this training, I will be going section to section, describing what each of those sections are and how best to complete the sheet. You may find it helpful to either have a hard copy of the IR sheet in front of you or a digital copy that you can follow along with. The first section to be completed is probably the easiest. It covers the landowner, also known as the participant's name and information. Our example farm will be the Flick farm. So with that, we're going to fill out that information. So the participant is the Flick farm. That location, its address is 250 Bush Hollow Road in Julian, Pennsylvania. And then we also have a drop down here for the county, and that's going to be Center County. So we'll select that. The other fields on the sheet are going to be specific to your office, and you'll fill that out based on your specific project. Now, before we go any further, a little bit of background for this training exercise. The farmer would like to have some visibility to their barn, which is located just off of the screen here. And this sets up a need for a shorter buffer in this area because he wants to have a clear view from the pasture to the barn. This makes it a great candidate for an herbaceous buffer. But beyond that, he also loves birds, so he'd like this buffer to help create bird habitat. Okay. This section, the IR sheet defines an herbaceous riparian buffer. It also provides two example photos. The photo on the left is a newly planted riparian herbaceous buffer with introduced grasses. The photo on the right is a well-established riparian herbaceous buffer of native grasses. The next section of the IR sheet is the purpose section, which allows you to toggle boxes that help you to define your project's purpose. They cover an array of purposes that range from pollutant reduction to enhancing habitats, rehabilitating waterways. Because of the farmer's request to support birds in their buffer, let's select the first toggle here, which says provide or improve food or cover for fish, wildlife, and livestock. The next section of the IR sheet gives a great description of an herbaceous riparian buffer. And as you're scrolling through the IR sheet, you're going to notice that there is a gray fillable field here. It's a caveat in regards to wildlife and identifying which species or types of species the buffer will benefit. In bold here, it says that herbaceous buffers must be primarily grass cover for filtration purposes and cannot be purely pollinator plantings. That is specific to this PA Practice Code 390. Pollinator plantings as land cover change is covered by Practice Code 327 and is not included in this training. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and update this to include grassland birds, which is the request of the farmer. So as we're continuing here, we also have a section that highlights potential plant communities that could be required by this practice. This fillable field gives you the option to call out specific communities you'd like to include. Unless your project is heavily focused on including additional plants beyond what is typically in an herbaceous buffer, you can leave this blank as I'm going to do here. So continuing on in the IR sheet, this next section will give you your first red field for this IR sheet. One thing I want to signpost is that IR sheet 390 refers to your herbaceous buffers as fields. So let's label this as field 1. As you're developing layout drawings, keep this in mind as you label your buffers on those drawings. I also want to say that this section gives you the option to fill out 2 fields or 2 buffers at one time. We're only going to do 1 for this exercise. So continuing on with this piece, this is actually a drop down here for site preparation method, and it gives you a couple options. And once you select one, it's going to populate that red field with text. These are the options here. Again, their main variance is on the level of herbicide and removal of competing invasive vegetation you will need on your site. Just a reminder that any herbicide applied for your project should be applied by a licensed herbicide applicator. and also noting that no site preparation needed is extremely rare. I don't think I've ever seen a potential buffer that doesn't need some level of site preparation. So for this example, we're going to choose the first one, which is apply appropriate herbicides to planned acres to remove existing vegetation. Because this training is to be used in tandem with my training for Practice Code 391, I chose this option because it aligns with the preferred preparation sequence for the entire project, including site preparation, planting of the forested riparian buffer, and then seeding of this herbaceous riparian buffer. That in mind, let's go ahead and schedule site preparation to be completed by the end of March, which is a drop down here. And then we're also going to add a note in the site-specific notes fillable field to make sure that the contractor is aware that we want it to coordinate with our forested riparian buffer as well. So we're saying coordinate site preparation of herbaceous riparian buffer with forested riparian buffer. For the next couple of pages, the IR sheet gives us options for which seeding or what types of seeding we'd like to schedule for this project. For this section, eventually, or for these sections, eventually, the sheet will automatically populate the pounds of seed needed once we input acreage. We'll get to that, but I want to just go through the different options that we have here and then make the best decision. So on the native grass options, we have 3 types of options. We have all native warm season grasses, we have mixed native warm season and cool season grasses, and then we have native cool season grasses. The other thing that I want to signpost is at the end of each of these options, you have some abbreviations. And what that talks about is the drainage class for your site. So that's going to range from EWD, which is excessively well drained, to PD, which is poorly drained. And I would refer you to your soils module to make your best determination there on what you're dealing with on each particular site. So let's go over the native grass options. For all native warm season grasses, these are great for creating habitat for wildlife. Their planting time is from April to June, and just signposting that they are slow to establish, but they are very long-lived. For the second option, which is a mix between warm season and cool season, again, it's great for habitat establishment. The best time to plant these, though, is going to be in late fall or early winter when your soil temperatures drop below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And one of the draws of this mix is that it actually provides year-round coverage. And then finally, the last option is native cool season grasses. They're typically planted between August and September, and just signposting that they go completely dormant in summer. So the next section here is for introduced grass options. For this section, there are 3 main options. One is for 1 grass and 1 legume. The second is for 1 grass and 3 legumes. I'm sorry, there's 4 options. The third option is 2 grasses and 2 legumes. And then the fourth one is 3 grasses and 3 legumes. These introduced grasses and legume mixes give you a few great benefits here. They tend to establish pretty quickly. Because they are incorporating legumes, no fertilizer is required. Legumes are naturally nitrogen fixers for the soil. And then just signposting here that the best time to plant these are between late August and September, which gives the legumes time to establish before the winter. So for this piece of this, we're going to actually go ahead and choose a native grass option, specifically the all native warm season grass. So that's in this first section here. And the reason for why we are choosing this option is because we are looking at this IR sheet in tandem with the training we did for IR sheet 391. The planting time for all native warm season grasses fits into our implementation schedule that was decided on for the forested buffer component of this project. Now, all of the warm season grass options would be appropriate, but we're going to go ahead with this third option. That's a mix of big blue stem, Indian grass, little blue stem, and switchgrass. because it gives us a bit more diversity of our native grasses. But now that we've kind of determined which type of grass seed we would like to use, we need to go back and remember our acreage for our herbaceous buffer. So as a reminder from the 391 training, we have determined that acreage on the IR 391 sheet. We determined that the herbaceous buffer component has a left and right stream length of 50 feet. So you can see that here and here. And then we calculated the left looking upstream average to be 53 feet by combining 55 and 50, dividing by 2 and rounding up. And then for the right looking upstream side to be 38 on average, which is 35 plus 40 divided by 2 and rounded up. So as we input those into IR sheet 391, it told us that our grass area is 0.1 acres. So with that in mind, we are going to go back to our I390 sheet, and in this fillable field under acres, at our selection point, we're going to input 0.1 acres. And you'll see that the IR sheet then populates that we need 1 pound of seed for that acreage. So now that we've made our seeding selection, we're continuing along in the IR sheet. The next section is another red field, and this is going to get us to how we would like to seed our riparian herbaceous cover. So again, we're going to go ahead and fill this in for field 1. And second, based on what we know of when to plant warm season grasses, let's go ahead and choose in this drop down that the seeding will be completed by the end of June. Because remembering that our native warm season grasses are best planted between April and June. For the seeding method, we have another drop down with a few options that will fill this red field again. So again, as we look at that drop down, we have these 3 options, which are basically planting by no-till drill, planting by conventional drill, or planting by broadcasting. For this example, we're going to go ahead and choose option 3, seed by broadcasting. And we're choosing this one because of the size of the buffer. It's 0.1 acres, it's pretty small, so it's going to be too difficult to get larger equipment in for no-till drill or conventional drill. And you can see that the red field has been populated. And there's also another option here for site-specific notes. And one thing that I always like to put in this section when we're giving instructions to the contractor for seeding is this note here, which reads, contractor to confirm all seed mix quantity prior to ordering and installing, and contractor to install to seed manufacturer's instructions. That puts the onus back on the installer just to double check your work here and to make sure that everything lines up. So the next section of the IR sheet gives brief information on best practices for establishment of an herbaceous cover. And then as we're going through here, we also land on a brief section for operation and maintenance. So as you're looking at this, we're going to see another drop-down piece. Again, we're going to fill in for field 1. So we're going to label it field 1. And then there's a drop-down here that gives us mowing time frame. So we have 2 options here in the month of August to protect bird nests and fledglings, or from November to March to protect pollinators and their host plants. Because of the nature of this project and because we're focused on birds, we're going to choose in the month of August to protect bird nests and fledglings. And then as you are looking at the operations and maintenance section or the O&M section, there's also 2 diagrams here that highlight potential mowing rotations. This is going to be fully up to what best suits the farmer, but note that the buffer is never fully mowed at one time, but it has staggered cuttings, and this will help with establishment, and it will still keep woody plants and invasive plant species out of the buffer. Similar to IR sheet 391, these last 2 sections are brief. So my recommendation again is to supplement both sections with additional resources from Penn State Extension's extensive library and to tailor that additional information for establishment and maintenance to your landowner's needs. This completes training for IR sheet 390.